And today's movie begins with a farmer's wife telling him about a monster that had suddenly appeared in the nearby lake. The farmer brushes his wife's concerns aside and leaves to go fishing at night after telling her not to believe in folktales. Meanwhile, their neighbors have decided to go on hunting for frogs since the storm has pushed all of the frogs onto the dry land. As they begin gathering frogs, one of the young boys notices a large egg nearby, and curious, all three of them lift the egg and start carrying it back home. On the other hand, the farmer reaches the lake and was about to start fishing when he hears something coming out of the water. Just as he looks up, he finds a large monster roaring at him. However, to his surprise, the monster ignores him and heads toward his neighbor who had stolen its egg. Then all of a sudden, the monster approaches them and begins roaring at them. Sometime later, screams from the men alerted the farmer's wife, who rushes toward the lake, and she starts looking around for her husband, but only finds his raincoat near the lake. I mean, after all, she did kinda warn the guy. And the next morning, the local police are contacted by the wife, and they show up at the crime scene, and when the police inspector shows up, he, along with other officers, decide to check out what had gone down. To their surprise, they see bodies that had been brutally mutilated with no signs of a murder weapon nearby. As they go further into the woods, they deduce that whatever it was that killed the men had disappeared into the water. Back in the village, Lynn starts making breakfast and wakes up her younger sister named May. While she finishes making breakfast, Lynn asks May to call her father and her brother Kang, and May goes outside and starts searching for her dad. When she was unable to find him, she heads toward the barn where her brother had passed out after a night of drinking, and she manages to wake up Kang, and the two of them head out to look for their father. But unfortunately, nobody's seen him, and they were just as clueless as the two siblings. Kang talks to another farmer about their dad, while May wanders off. In the middle of the field, she finds the same egg that the farmers had discovered the night before, and she picks it up and calls Kang, who's impressed to find her. The two of them head back home, where they show Lynn the large egg, but she doesn't share their excitement and tells them to just get rid of it. She tells May that they don't know who the egg belongs to, and it might not be safe to keep it with them. But instead of listening to her, May insists on keeping the egg with her and waiting to see what will come out of it. Angry with Lynn for telling her to get rid of the egg, May goes outside with the egg and finds herself at the lake. And this is when she notices ripples in the lake, but doesn't really pay too much attention to it and continues to pet the egg. And during this time, Kang and Lynn begin searching for May, and Lynn was upset with Kang for drinking all night, but he tells her to mind her own business since she is not his mom. Eventually, the two of them end up at the lake, where they spot May's belongings, but not May herself. Lynn immediately realizes that her sister had drowned in the sea and begins screaming her name. Kang jumps into the water and starts searching for May in the muddy water, but is unable to see anything. Then all of a sudden, Lynn notices something moving in the water and tries to warn Kang, and just as he sees the monster circling him, he rushes to get out of the water, but the monster manages to bite a chunk out of his shoulder. And despite this fact, the two of them still manage to get out of the water and start running away, but the monster starts to follow them and wreaks havoc in its wake, and as they enter the village, the monster enters after them and starts killing people around it. Kang and Lynn make their way into the bushes so they can hide from the monster, but Kang doesn't make it far and falls to the ground in pain. Lynn drags him across the field and they end up on the road, where they come across a car. The man stops the car and takes them both to a hospital, where Kang is rushed inside so the doctors can operate on him, and as a result of the injury, he starts to hallucinate and begins to see the monster inside his head. Another nurse takes Lynn aside and asks her if she's okay and what happened to them, but she was too shocked to give an answer, and meanwhile, the monster rushes to the edge of the hill that overlooks the city and starts to look around. Back at the hospital, the doctors inform the police about the incident, and the inspector, who'd already heard of the attack on the villagers, immediately heads to the hospital. They question Lynn, and she starts telling them about the horrific incident and the monster that had emerged from the lake, and she also talks about how it killed several farmers as well. The police carefully listen to her testimony, but they don't take her seriously, and they think that Lynn was in shock and was just making up the story in her head. Later that night, while the police go back to the police station, a man in the city was attacked by the monster. The next morning, another report of a monster attack reaches the police, and this is when they finally start believing Lynn's story. With no choice left, they call Detective James, a highly skilled officer, to the crime scene in the middle of the city, and when the detective arrives there, he notices multiple dead bodies with claw marks all over them. Another officer informs him that the witnesses described the monster as a creature that's bigger than humans with crocodile-like skin and a tail like a snake. The detective assesses the crime scene and then goes out for lunch with his coworker, and the two of them try to come up with explanations of what the creature looks like and what it is. As they start talking, the detective receives another call informing him about another attack that had taken place in the city. That evening, the police commander gathers everyone in his office and tells them that they need to come up with a plan to capture the monster. They decide that since the monster is hiding in the lake, they need to split up into teams so they can cover more ground quickly. Just as the commander dismisses everyone, Detective James receives a call from his daughter's school, and his daughter Pam had gotten suspended and he was asked to pick her up. He picks Pam up from school and tries asking her why she won't stop misbehaving, only to receive no answer. Back at the hospital, Lynn holds Kang's hand while he was unconscious, recovering from his injuries. Kang, on the other hand, has a nightmare about the monster before suddenly waking up. The doctors come to check up on him, and he discovers that he's unable to speak as a result of the injuries that he sustained. And then he finds himself strangely connected to the monster and gets visions of May hiding from the creature. As his visions end, he touches his wounds and discovers the same slime that the creature was leaving behind. Frantically, he writes something on a piece of paper and tells Lynn that he knows where the monster is hiding. During this time, the commander gathers with the townspeople and was about to leave on a hunt for the monster. But before he can go, Lynn interrupts him and tells him that her brother knows where the monster is hiding, and everyone decides to follow Kang, who leads them toward an abandoned building where the monster was hiding. One of the men throws a small bomb inside the building to lure out the monster, but this only agitates it further. As a result, the monster comes out of the building and starts attacking people. However, it is soon overpowered and the men capture it. Just as the commander orders everyone to kill it, Lynn stops them and tells them that her brother is somehow connected to the monster, and that killing it would probably mean that her brother would die as well. The commander then finally listens to her and orders his men to lock up the monster without harming it, and on the other side of town, James arrives at the lake with the other team and they begin their investigation. They notice large footprints in the mud that belong to the monster as well, but suddenly, May comes out from hiding and refuses to say a word. Before they can ask her any more questions, a much larger monster than the one that the police commander had captured appears behind them. The monster goes unnoticed, and James makes May sit in his car with his daughter while he talks to the other officer. May still had the egg with her, and the detective had placed it inside his car. And this is around the time when he finally notices the monster approaching his car. Not being able to do much, he calls Pam and tells her to stay inside the car and to not make a sound, and while the monster circles the vehicle, the egg starts to vibrate as if it's ready to hatch. Despite being told not to make a sound, Pam starts screaming, drawing the attention of the creature. The monster tries to claw its way inside the car just so it can get to the egg, but James assumes that it's trying to hurt his daughter. And to take the monster's attention away from the car, he starts shooting at it, but instead, he ends up making the monster angry. Right away, it starts to chase after him, and at the last moment, he manages to jump inside his car, saving himself from the monster's wrath. And meanwhile, the detective's friend takes out oxygen tanks from his car and throws it toward the monster, and he then shoots at it, causing it to explode. However, this does nothing to the monster except agitate it even further. The monster then breaks the door of the car that Pam and May were in and proceeds to take the egg into its mouth. Pam assumes that the monster left when everything went quiet outside and decides to get out of the car. Just as she steps out, she notices the monster behind her who pins Pam to the ground. And at that moment, James climbs out of the lake and finds his daughter in danger. He sees another oxygen tank nearby and shoots at it, and this time, he successfully manages to harm the monster, at least enough for it to turn away and leave with the egg. James then picks his injured daughter up and rushes to the nearest hospital, but before they can get there, they find that Pam's injuries are much worse than they assumed, and she bleeds out in front of him. On the other side of town, the commander issues an alert for all of the townspeople to head toward the temple. However, there was too much chaos around him as people try to kill the captured creature. And just then, the commander receives a call from Detective James, who tells him that there's another monster, which is much larger than the one that they captured, and it's actually headed toward them. The commander tries his best to evacuate as many people as he can, but soon they hear the roar of the large monster. When people hear its roar, they start running in the opposite direction. However, the monster, in search of the captured creature, begins killing anyone who comes in its way. With people rushing to get out of town, the buses that were supposed to evacuate everyone got stuck, and the commander realizes that there's no time left, and he tells his men to help people leave on foot. Here we see James getting on the bus with May, but the monster catches up with them him and stands tall behind the bus. Two college students on the bus notice that the monster is only searching for its baby and does not intend to harm anyone if they don't come in its way. They then contact the commander and tell him that they need to let the trapped monster go, and the commander then orders his men to abandon the vehicle carrying the monster as the large one is headed toward it. During this time, Lin and her brother Kang rush to evacuate the town as well, but Kang realizes that he can't leave with everybody else since the monster had gotten captured because of him, and he bids Lin goodbye and stabs the monster in the truck, and this causes it to scream, successfully drawing the attention of the larger monster. Kang then gets inside the truck and begins driving toward the lake, and his plan works and the larger monster starts following him, and the monster gets further away from the city, giving people a chance to escape. Kang becomes a hero as he saves several lives by taking the monster away from the populated areas. Back in town, Lin sees May with Detective James and hugs her in relief. However, her relief is short-lived as the detective voices out his suspicions, and he claims that May is related to the monster's attack and is responsible for the death of his daughter. A few days later, the commander tells the police department that no one can open the investigation for the case again because they don't want to instill fear in the hearts of people. But this decision doesn't really sit well with the detective, and he ends up quitting his job, and he continues his search for the monster, but both the monster and Kang have disappeared. The movie then shifts to a scene 5 years later where an older James was following a teenage May, and despite everybody's warnings, May had continued visiting the lake, and unaware that she's being watched, she brings a goat from the farm, and to James's horror, he discovers that the monster appears in front of the young girl and devours the goat. Then the two of them hug, indicating that the two of them share a very close bond. James follows May back to her home where he confronts her about her friendship with the monster, but before he can grab May, a monster jumps out from the lake and runs toward James, intending to attack him. However, James, who spent the past 5 years preparing for this exact moment, uses a flash bomb to burn the monster's eyes, and when the monster was down, he goes to kill him, but gets a flashback of a monk telling him that the death of loved ones is part of life, and if he lets vengeance motivate him now, he might turn into the very same monster that he's trying to kill. A few days later, May leads James into a temple deep within the mountains, and he begins following the girl and manages to make his way inside. There he finds Kang's torn bloody shirt, and as he moves forward, he discovers writings on the wall that reveal that the lake monsters used to be worshipped by people in the ancient times. And the movie ends with James turning around to find the large monster staring at him, almost as if it was waiting for him. And that is how this terrific movie comes to an end.